The Vatican press hall was a chamber of marble and light. Yet the air inside felt heavy, charged with a tension that could shatter at the smallest sound. The long rows of journalists sat in an expectant stillness, their pens and cameras poised like weapons. They were not here for ceremony. They were here for blood. At the center, framed by towering columns, sat Pope Leo XIV. His white robes seemed untouched by shadow, but his eyes carried the weight of storms unseen. Facing him across the aisle, Luca Ventresca adjusted the microphone before him with the precision of a man sharpening a blade. He was no ordinary journalist. In Rome, he was known as the one who had humbled presidents and cornered cardinals. Today, his target was the most powerful spiritual leader in the world. For weeks, speculation had spiraled beyond the Vatican walls. First one cardinal removed, then another, and now a third, each dismissal as sudden as it was unexplained. The faithful whispered about a divine purge. The critics hissed about power plays and secret agendas. And Luca had come to force an answer into the light. He leaned forward, his tone smooth, almost respectful, but his words shaped to cut. Holy Father, is this cleansing of the Church truly the will of God, or your own? The words did not echo, yet they seemed to hang in the space between them like smoke. A few heads turned toward the Pope, searching for the flicker of surprise or the twitch of unease. None came. Pope Leo's hands were folded loosely, his posture that of a man who neither braced for impact nor reached for defense. When he finally spoke, it was not with the speed of a man scrambling for an answer, but with the steady cadence of one delivering a verdict. Some removals are ordered by men, he said, each word measured, but others are demanded by heaven, and when heaven demands, I obey. Silence swept the hall. Even the faint hum of the cameras seemed to fade into nothing. In that moment, the question of politics dissolved into something deeper, more dangerous. The Pope had not simply defended his actions. He had declared them an act of obedience to the highest authority. Before we go further, comment where you are watching from. I will be checking. Holy Shadows does not sugarcoat the truth. If you believe the Church still has a sacred duty to protect the innocent, subscribe now. And if you will not, then write your reason in the comments for all to read. Pope Leo XIV had not been born into the halls of power. His life before the white cassock had been written in the dust of forgotten roads and the smoke of burning villages. As a young priest, he had walked barefoot through the slums of South America, where the air was thick with poverty and the gospel was whispered in secret. It was there, under a sun that burned without mercy, that he had survived an assassination attempt. An ambush meant to silence him for speaking against a cartel that used religion as a mask for its crimes. The bullet had missed his heart by less than an inch. Some called it luck. Pope Leo called it a reminder that a life spared is a life owed, to truth, to justice, to the defense of the innocent. That conviction had not faded with time. If anything, the weight of the papal office had only hardened it into something unyielding. Across from him now sat Luca Ventresca, a man shaped not by faith, but by the applause of the world. An award-winning journalist whose face was as familiar on television screens as any head of state, Luca had built his reputation on dismantling the untouchable. He was charming in the way storms are beautiful from a distance, dangerous only when you find yourself in their path. He was known to speak truth to power, but in certain circles, it was whispered that his truth often bent to serve his own wounds. His father had been a priest, laicized after a scandal that had never been proven but had destroyed him nonetheless. Luca had never forgiven the Church. The Vatican's marble press hall, where they now faced each other, was a place designed for grandeur. The floor gleamed like a still lake. The ceiling soared high with painted saints who seemed to watch in silent judgment. Every major news outlet had sent its best, and the world was watching live. The room was lit as if for a coronation, but the mood was that of a courtroom awaiting a verdict. The removal of a third cardinal in just 2 months was not a matter of private housekeeping. It was a declaration of war within the Church itself. To some, Pope Leo was a reformer, finally cutting away the rot that had clung to sacred walls for too long. To others, he was a dictator in holy robes, consolidating power under the veil of righteousness. Each camp waited for this press conference to confirm what they already believed. But beneath the speculation lay a quieter, sharper truth. The Pope was not merely speaking to Luca Ventresca today. He was speaking to every soul who had grown comfortable with corruption, every hand that had turned the other way in the face of evil. And in that marble hall, with the world watching, there would be no retreat into polite evasions. If you can already see the storm building here, subscribe now, because holy shadows will take you into the eye of it. And if you think we are overreacting, write it in the comments and stand by it when others reply. Luca began with a smile that did not reach his eyes. His voice was measured, the kind of tone that suggested civility while sharpening the blade beneath it. "Holy Father," he said, leaning slightly forward as if to close the space between them, "these recent removals, 3 cardinals in less than 2 months. Many are wondering if this is about protecting the Church or consolidating your own influence. Is this cleansing for God's sake, or for political convenience?" The question was wrapped in politeness, but it was weighted to make the Pope choose between 2 answers, both of which could be twisted against him. Pope Leo did not rush. He regarded Luca the way one might regard a man who believed himself to be holding a winning hand, unaware that the game was different than he imagined. When he spoke, his voice was steady, without the slightest quiver of defensiveness. "Power, Mr. Ventresca, is a fleeting currency," he said. "It changes hands with the turning of the hourglass. But truth remains long after names are forgotten. My duty is not to cling to influence, but to guard that truth from being devoured." Luca shifted in his seat, a flicker of irritation passing over his expression. "But surely," he countered, "removing such high-ranking leaders without full public explanation risks slander. Should not the faithful know every reason for such drastic measures?" The Pope's gaze did not waver. "Slander," he said quietly, "is the deliberate twisting of truth to destroy the innocent. It is not slander to remove those who have betrayed their vows, even when the full evidence cannot be shouted into the streets. There are sins that, when dragged into the open too soon, wound the victims a second time. My first concern is not the comfort of the curious. It is the protection of the innocent." There was a faint tightening around Luca's jaw, the smallest sign that his first thrust had not landed as intended. He tried again, this time with a sharper edge. "And who decides what the faithful may or may not hear? Is that not dangerous power to place in one man's hands?" Pope Leo's answer came without hesitation. "It is dangerous power, Mr. Ventresca, but it is also dangerous responsibility. I am not free to speak according to my will. I am bound to God, to conscience, and to the weight of souls entrusted to me. If you think that is freedom, then you have misunderstood the burden entirely." In the rows of journalists, some shifted uncomfortably. They had expected the Pope to dodge, to drown the questions in vague theology. Instead, he had met them head-on, neither defensive nor apologetic, turning each one toward a higher plane where politics could not easily follow. If you are starting to feel that calm does not mean weakness, click subscribe, because Holy Shadow stands where others bow. But if you will not, tell us why side with the loud instead of the wise. Luca's tone hardened. The veneer of polite inquiry began to crack, revealing the steel beneath. "Holy Father," he said, his voice carrying further now, "you speak of protecting the innocent, yet many clergy accused of far worse remain in their positions. You remove 3 cardinals swiftly without public trial, but others, men with darker accusations, are still untouched. Is this justice or selective outrage?" The question struck with precision, and some in the hall leaned forward, sensing that here was the opening Luca had been waiting for. The cameras zoomed in on the Pope's face, searching for discomfort, for even the faintest twitch of retreat. They found none. Pope Leo let a pause settle between them, long enough for the silence to feel like a presence in the room. Then, in the same even tone as before, he spoke. "I have walked through villages where the only sound left was the wind moving through abandoned homes, places emptied not by war, but by the greed of those who claimed to serve the people. I have stood beside priests who refused bribes from men who could have spared their lives, and watched them die rather than betray their vows. Those men will never be known to the world. Their stories will never trend on your screens. But they are the measure by which I act. Luca shifted, his jaw tightening, but the Pope continued, his words gathering weight. Justice is not a performance for the applause of the crowd. Some cases can be resolved only in silence, because speaking too soon destroys what little can be saved. Other cases must be made public, not to shame, but to warn. And when I choose which is which, I am not thinking of headlines, Mr. Ventresca. I am thinking of souls. Luca leaned back, narrowing his eyes. Still, you cannot deny that politics plays a role here. Which cardinals you choose to remove, which you allow to remain, these choices divide the Church. The Pope's eyes softened, though his voice carried no concession. Politics divides. The gospel unites. If I acted to win the favor of one faction or another, the Church would collapse under the weight of my ambition. But if I act to serve the gospel, even those who oppose me will one day understand why. There was no rise in volume, no flash of temper, only a quiet authority that seemed to press on the air itself. Then, unexpectedly, the Pope's expression warmed. I have sat at the bedsides of the dying and listened to their last words. Not one of them asked me about politics. Not one of them cared about the offices or the titles of men. They asked for forgiveness. They asked for peace. That is the work I will answer for, and nothing else. The room held still again, the balance of power shifting almost imperceptibly. Luca's voice had been sharp, but the Pope had answered with something deeper than defense. He had answered with the weight of lived truth. If truth mixed with mercy still moves you, subscribe, because here at Holy Shadows, we do not flinch. If it does not move you, perhaps write why in the comments, and see if you can stand the replies. The silence after Luca's accusation was heavy enough to press against the chest. No shuffling papers, no clearing throats, just the kind of stillness that feels like the world holding its breath. The Pope didn't blink. His gaze stayed steady, not defiant, not defensive, but unshaken. When he finally spoke, the voice was low, as if it carried the weight of more years than any crown or robe could give. I have held the hand of a child whose last breath came before her first prayer was finished. No flourish, no drama, just the truth, laid down like a blade on the table. I have walked in villages where the air still smelled of smoke from the homes burned down overnight. I have stood with mothers who dug graves with their bare hands because there were no shovels left. And you, his eyes didn't narrow, but they didn't need to. You ask me if I am a puppet. He didn't move his hands, didn't point, didn't rise. Yet the words themselves seemed to stand. If refusing to bow to fear makes me naive, then I accept that title with joy. You call it weakness to protect the innocent? I call it sacred. The light from the stained glass behind him shifted. Reds, golds, and deep blues falling across the crucifix on the wall. It was as if the scene itself was answering the accusation, without a single extra word. Luca opened his mouth, but the first sound that came wasn't a word. It was breath. Just breath. The kind a man takes when the fight he thought he was winning suddenly feels lost. The Pope leaned forward ever so slightly, but the tone stayed calm. If you wish to talk of hidden powers, let us speak of the one power no man sees until it is too late, the pull of fear. It makes good men turn on each other. It makes shepherds abandon their flock. And it makes even the brave forget what they were fighting for. He paused, not for effect, but for the kind of silence that gives a man time to see himself in the mirror of another's words. And then, without shifting his tone, the Pope added, "But here, in this house, fear has no crown." The sunlight behind him seemed brighter now, refracted in a dozen colors across the marble floor. If words like that don't deserve a platform, unsubscribe from Holy Shadows right now. But if they do and you still haven't subscribed, then I have to ask, why are you still waiting? The hush in the hall felt almost unnatural, like the air itself refused to move until the next word was spoken. The Pope did not lean forward, nor did he raise his voice. He simply let the weight of the moment rest on everyone's shoulders before he spoke. You confuse engagement with endorsement, Luca. His tone was calm, but there was an undercurrent, steel wrapped in velvet. If a shepherd walks into a burning field to save his sheep, he is not joining the fire, he is confronting it. My role, our role, is not to make alliances with power, but to remind power of what it owes to the powerless. Luca opened his mouth, but the Pope lifted a hand, not in command, but in patience. You think my presence among rulers means I am one of them. You are wrong. Spiritual authority has one true mandate: to defend life. Not to curry favor, not to choose sides in the games of men, but to stand where the vulnerable have no voice. When I meet with kings, with presidents, with men you call corrupt, I am not their guest. I am their mirror. The silence deepened. Chairs creaked. Somewhere in the back, a pen slipped from a journalist's hand and clattered to the floor, echoing far louder than it should have. I will not allow the gospel to be reduced to a party slogan, the Pope continued. Because the moment it does, it stops being the gospel, it becomes just another tool of manipulation. And once that happens, the poor are forgotten, the widows are ignored, the orphans are left to fend for themselves, and the church becomes a hollow monument instead of a living body. He paused, his eyes moving across the room, pausing on faces, not as a performer scans an audience, but as a father checks to see which of his children are still listening. This is why you misunderstand me, Luca. You see my willingness to enter the halls of power and think it means agreement. But the truth? It is confrontation. It is bringing light into the rooms where shadows gather thickest. And if that light blinds, then so be it. The tension in Luca's face shifted, not defeat, but the sharp discomfort of a man who realizes the foundation of his argument has just been quietly removed brick by brick. And in that stillness, the Pope let the final blow land, not as an attack, but as a revelation. When I stand in those rooms, I do not bow to politics. I make politics bow to the cross. A faint murmur ran through the hall, half awe, half unease. Even the cameras seemed to lean in. Then came the stillness again, that dangerous, holy stillness. And in that stillness, the narrator's voice cuts through. Steady, challenging, almost whispering to the viewer. If seeing arrogance fall to truth gives you hope, subscribe. And if it doesn't, comment why, so others can read and respond. The Pope's gaze moved from Luca to the crowd, no longer locked in a duel of wills, but in a quiet, almost fatherly sweep across the room. This is not about one man, he began, his voice slower now, each word given room to breathe. And it is not about one question. His hands, which had been clasped tightly on the table, opened slightly, palms facing the audience as if offering something invisible. It is about the kind of church we leave behind, the kind of world we leave behind. Will it be a place where the weak are only noticed when they are trampled? Or will it be a place where the smallest voice, the most fragile life, is protected as fiercely as the most powerful? A long silence followed, but it was not the silence of discomfort. It was the kind that descends when the air itself becomes heavy with truth. Even the sound of cameras clicking had stopped. I tell you this, the Pope continued. Whether you believe as I believe or not, you carry a responsibility. All of us do. To stand between the wolf and the lamb. To stand between the corrupt hand and the innocent life. To seek the truth, not to twist it into a weapon, but to hold it as a lantern. His words cut through the tension that had once filled the hall, replacing it with a strange warmth. The kind that makes you sit straighter, breathe deeper, almost ashamed at how far your own heart might have drifted from such simplicity. Because we do not need more voices shouting, he said, leaning forward ever so slightly. We need more hearts listening. The phrase hung there, weighty, final, not as a mic drop, but as a benediction. The journalists, even those who had been scribbling furiously, lowered their pens. Some leaned back in their seats. Others stared at the crucifix above the Pope's head, where the afternoon light streamed through the stained glass and pooled in colors on the marble floor. And in that moment, the question was no longer about whether the Pope had won or lost the exchange with Luca. The question was whether anyone in that hall could walk away unchanged. If you believe this world needs fewer voices shouting and more hearts listening, subscribe to Holy Shadows so you never miss the light in the dark. If you don't, Put your reason in writing. Don't hide in silence. Pope Leo let the final echo of his words fade until the hall was wrapped in a stillness that felt heavier than silence. Then, with the weight of a man who knew the cost of truth, he leaned ever so slightly forward, as if closing the distance between the podium and every soul listening. "What?" he asked, his voice deliberate and unwavering. "Would you have said if you were in this room?" The question hung there not as a challenge but as a mirror. Each person, journalist, camera operator, distant viewer, was forced to confront themselves, not him. He was no longer defending his position. He was demanding theirs. "This is not about agreeing with me or opposing me," he continued, his tone now softer, yet sharper in its reach. "It is about whether we dare to speak when the moment demands it, and whether we dare to listen when the truth is hard." His eyes swept the hall one last time, then settled on no one in particular. "May we all seek truth with humble hearts, and act before the hour is too late." And then, with the steady calm of a man unafraid of the dark because he knows the light, he offered the only invitation left to give. Subscribe to Holy Shadows if you want the light to keep breaking through the darkness. If not, then comment why you choose the shadows instead.